you think the U.S. military is just not considering that region a priority?
Well, there's people who know, and they have often, and I don't know what the reasons are, but they often have a hard time of looking beyond the immediate priorities or the edges of the region. That's how I would describe it. Instead of looking at the whole map and saying, we got to pay some attention everywhere, they just, for some reason, don't seem able to do what needs done. And I say to have that permanent presence, to establish themselves in the region, show the locals that they give two hoots. And as they set up a permanent presence, as it is, they do send boats and aircraft through and maybe do some exercises, but that's kind of like a cargo cult. Or like the Harlem Globetrotters who show up once a year and put on a great show and everyone has fun, but they don't get any better at basketball. And nor does that prevent some other basketball team coming up while you're gone. But I don't really know what the reason is. I'd say ultimately a lack of imagination. I would, without being snide, I think if you asked any number of captains and majors what we ought to be doing, they'd tell you right away. And then if you said, okay, here's a credit card and go get some plane tickets, go get things done, I think they'd probably get it right. Because we have been offered things in the Pacific, and the captains and the majors understood, even put together plans in some cases that would have worked out just right. And at the higher levels, this was just turned down for whatever reason. Oh, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. It would never pass the interagency process in Washington. We need another 6 years to do the PowerPoint slide deck, et cetera, et cetera. There's any number of excuses why, but
making good PowerPoint is hard.
Oh, I can't do it. But at the same time, the Chinese can. Or they don't even, I don't even think they have PowerPoint.
There was a New York Times article about how the military uses too much PowerPoint.
They
really?
do.
About how terrible all these PowerPoint meetings are.
Yeah, but it is. But, that said, I'm being obviously a little, tongue-in-cheek about it. But for whatever reason, and I've been around long enough, that this has been going on for decades. We're active in the region, we do things, we engage. But then, for example, a few years back, the Marines asked themselves, we've done all these things for 50 years with our partners. Now, who could we do an actual real-world amphibious operation with on short notice? Nobody. So we do a lot, but we don't keep score. But back to the Pacific Islands. This is a place that, you have to look beyond that first island chain, and it helps to look farther to the east and sort of stiffen your defenses and everywhere. Because the Chinese are, by their presence in the Solomons and throughout the region, Kiribati, Vanuatu, just New Guinea, everywhere, they understand the strategic geography, and they're leapfrogging the so-called first island chain that hems them in. And if you can get behind your opponent's defenses, well, he's got a problem. And you can erode them from behind. And you don't even have to do it by fighting. You do it commercially, politically, influencing, psychologically. And you're seeing that played out throughout the region. And unfortunately, you're seeing it in South America, the Caribbean, Africa, just about everywhere. And we're standing here transfixed like we're looking at a cobra and can't decide if we want to move or not. But we've gotten ourselves into a fix, and I presume that the good Lord will get us out of it somehow.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned sort of how China is leapfrogging the first island chain, because, this then brings us into the issue of Taiwan, which is a major thing we have to, no discussion of security in the Pacific can really be complete without discussing Taiwan. Now, this does seem to be how the U.S. is treating Taiwan does seem to have consistency between the Trump and Biden administration. It seems like there is more and more overt support for Taiwan. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the Biden administration, I think, has done some things for Taiwan that are good. And they have, as I maintained that Trump policy. That insufferable Mr. Trump. But nonetheless, Biden people seem to think he was good enough in this regard. They've done things, most recently invited Taiwan to the Democracy Summit. in its own right, this is like getting invited maybe to an Amway convention for what it produces. But in terms of the symbolism of it, this is immense. It would have been very easy to say, nah, it's just too much trouble. We don't want to get the Chinese mad. And that's what most administrations would have said before the Trump administration. But the Biden team did this, and that's a good thing. They have treated the Taiwanese with more respect. They have allowed congressmen to go visit Taiwan, etc. They've talked and they've have, as I said, used their sort of verbal weaponry on Taiwan's behalf, and they deserve credit for that. The larger approach to China, that's another issue. But every administration has been challenged by that. But what they have done for Taiwan is actually a pretty good. They've done some good things, and as I say, they deserve credit for that. But then you do have, their work cut out for them, because you're probably going to have, for example, Honduras switch to the PRC maybe before this show is over. And what is the Biden administration doing, sort of, on things like that? So you can invite somebody to a summit, but there's a lot more that needs to be done to bolster Taiwan's position.
You mentioned Honduras, and that kind of raises an issue of Honduras is not necessarily good governance, let's say. And it seems like there's this difficulty of do I want to work with a government that is problematic in a lot of ways, but try to build that relationship enough that at least we can stop them from, getting into bed completely with China, right? And Nicaragua as well, which still has relations with Taiwan, but has been wooed by the CCP. And the Solomon Islands, right? It's Australia is, whoever's in power, they want to be there so they can have influence. And this is naturally the way that Western governments tend to operate. And I'm not saying this to defend Australia. This is just more my perception of the political realities as these Western governments see it. It's they can either be there and try to play ball with that local government, even if the government has a lot of problems, or they can withdraw. But the consequence of withdrawal is that who's going to come in? It's going to be China. And then that's going to create bigger problems. So, what do you do?
Those are good points. And one thing that gets my attention, I wish we'd do better at it, is that for some reason, the Americans don't do political warfare. We tend to stand clear of domestic politics, or we think we do. But in all of these countries, we have constituencies that like us, that like what we stand for. And they want our help. And even, I say, just a moral support sometimes helps. There's financial support you can provide in certain ways. And you've got to give them some effort. We have to defend, you have to help our friends in these places. And otherwise, it's like watching two people fight. One of them's using brass knuckles and the other isn't. And the brass knuckle guy is winning. But we're not going to help him because we're not going to step in. It's not our thing, not our place. But administrations like the Obama administration had no trouble interfering in, say, Israeli elections because they hated Netanyahu so much, or interfering in the UK's Brexit vote, which both were ill-advised. But there are ways that you can support our allies, support our friends in each of these countries. And that's things that we ought to do. And once again, we need to be more engaged from a government perspective. Once again, as we said, if you don't have an embassy there, how serious are you? Or if your embassy is two people. But also there's commercial support that you can provide. But we don't. We tend to stand clear with eyes primly averted, while some pretty thuggish people are allowed to run roughshod over a society or a government. And once again, I would point to Venezuela as just a case in point for this.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say, the U.S. doesn't really do political warfare, because there is this perception, at least, that, the CIA is this super powerful organization and undermining every country in the world. Whereas China, they don't do anything like that. They have no larger ambitions. So it's interesting that this is the perception that is out there.
If people only knew. I think they just how inept we are at political warfare. I'm told that there are people on the U.S. government payroll, like GS Jobs, who get paid to do this sort of thing. It's a well-kept secret what they actually do. But we don't do it. We used to know how to do it back in the Cold War.
Didn't a lot of that kind of go wrong in Central and South America? Like, are Americans trying to decide who should win the election?
Well, they say you have to do this the right way, and or you'll have this Guatemala Freddy Arbenz. See, I had to throw that out because I'm old enough to know the name. But also look at what we did against the Russians using Lech Walesa. With the Poles, the Pope, they did a pretty good job of bringing down the Soviet Union. So we kind of used to know how to do it. We were smart enough to find people who could do it and support them, back them. It's not us taking the front all the time. But if you do it right, but the first thing, if you're going to do it, you have to kind of understand how it works and have some commitment to do it, and then don't do boneheaded things.
Like funding Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviets.
Oopsie.
Well, actually, they didn't use bin Laden to fight the Soviets. He was actually a nobody then. That whole idea that the CIA somehow created and funded bin Laden is mistaken, and I will say that with some knowledge of it. He was like a nobody. He and his Wahhabis, all they were very good at was chopping off the heads of female teachers. They were not very good fighters at all. There were other things that weren't done very well in that Charlie Wilson's war business, but the bin Laden thing wasn't one of them. But I know what you mean. But what I would say is, well, they look at all the opportunities they had to squander, that they to get rid of him or Al Qaeda, that they squandered in the 90s, and then it leads up to 9/11, and that's back to the Solomons. We've had these opportunities over the last decade to sort of help our partners in that country, and we squandered them, and it tends to sort of brew up and it explodes like it did the other day. Whereas all this could have been worked out or could have been avoided if we had paid attention to it in the right way before that.